Hello, my name is Chris Bursler. I will be your moderator for this session. Welcome to Self-Care for Siblings. Just as a reminder, your camera is on. If your camera is on, we can see you, and if your mic is on, we can hear you. So please mute yourself. Please use the chat box or raise hand function for any questions you may have during the session. The presenters will respond to questions at the end. And as a further reminder, this session is going to be recorded and will be made available to SLN members in our online archives. Let's see. Copy. I will be placing a link for any conference handouts right now in the chat box. And now I will turn things over to our lovely presenter. Right. Kaley, are you there? I believe, hang on just a moment.
There we are. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Awesome. No worries. All right, let me get my screen shared for you guys. I'm so excited to see 51 people here, you know, on a Friday night virtual conference. I was like, whew, if I have 5 people, this is going to be great. So it is really awesome to see all of you here, and thanks for sharing your evening with me. Let me get this pulled up. One moment. All right, are you seeing that full screen? Great. All right, well, welcome to Self-Care for Siblings. My name is Kaley Day, and I use she, her pronouns. As kind of noted in the session summary, I'm not a licensed mental health professional in any way, but I'm just a person who, out of my own necessity and life experience, has come to recognize the importance of self-care. And self-care for me is also teaching other people about it and encouraging others to use self-care skills as well. So that's why I'm here. I'm just very passionate about it. So a little bit about me. Professionally, I work as an advocate for adults at AdvocacyDenver, which is the Denver County chapter of the ARC. So helping folks navigate the Medicaid system services, other public services, making sure that rights are being upheld and their voices are at the front and center of those services. I'm the board president for Rocky Mountain Sibs, which is the Colorado chapter of the SLN network. As far as being a sibling, I am the youngest and only girl to my 2 older brothers. You can see in this photo here. I didn't have room to add image descriptions to this page, so I am going to go through and describe each image just for any potential blind or visually impaired folks that are here with us. There's a picture of me and my 2 brothers. We're all standing in a row from shortest to tallest, and I'm in the middle. My brother Carrie is here on the left, and my brother Casey, who is a very tall 6'6" guy, is to my right. We are all wearing shirts that say veteran son and veteran daughter, which is another important piece of my story too, because our father is a veteran that struggles with PTSD and other chronic illness, and that has certainly added a layer of responsibility and caregiving in my family. So it's an important part of our story. Here on the bottom left, you see a photo of me and Carrie both wearing some funny Frankenstein Halloween headband and face mask. This photo was actually taken in 2013 when Carrie was admitted to the hospital for what would end up being his 2nd kidney transplant. This is an important part of my self-care story because I was, gosh, how old was I in 2013? I was around 22. And I was there the minute he got into the hospital and all through the whole process. And it was at this point in time where my mom kind of turned to me and said, I hope you're taking notes because the next time this happens, you're going to be in charge. And that was when the full weight of the responsibility, my future responsibility, my current responsibility, what caregiving was going to look like, it really hit me. And this was at a time in my life when I was also really grappling with and starting to understand my own mental health issues and starting to recognize how important self-care and just taking care of that was going to be important to the longevity and, success of me being a sibling caregiver. Also, just like to throw in a fun fact that I will hopefully soon be a cat owner, and that's another part of self-care for me. I'm currently living alone and have realized that I definitely need another living thing to talk to. So I'm hoping to adopt a cat sometime this summer. The last picture on this slide to the right here is just a photo of my brother Carey that I love. He was dressed to the nines for an event here in town. And it's just a great photo of him that I like to share because Carey is the reason why I do what I do. He's the reason why I'm here and why I'm so passionate about it. And I'm grateful for him and the relationship that we do have. So jumping into caregiving. You all may have heard of what we call in kind of the broad sense of caregiving, the oxygen mask dilemma, and what it means in that, when you get on a plane and they go through the safety announcements, which they really don't do that often anymore, but they used to tell you when the oxygen mask comes down, it is important to put yours on first before you help or assist, a child or somebody next to you with putting theirs on. And as caregivers, this is kind of the constant battle of how do we put on our own oxygen masks first while also having this responsibility to care for another person. And as siblings, there's some very specific and different layers that are added to that dilemma in our experience as well. The first being that the sibling relationship is likely going to be one of the longest relationships of your life. Your sibling and you will probably be around longer than your parents. Your sibling and you are going to have a relationship certainly longer than different friends and providers that come in and out of our lives. It's a relationship that is kind of with us for a lot longer than others. Then as a sibling, this isn't a job. Being a caregiver isn't necessarily a job we asked for, right? When our parents decided to have kids, or if you were an accident like me, they still took on that responsibility knowing that they were going to raise this kid, right? When you're just born into a family, you're just born into it. And you are kind of given this almost assumed responsibility. And sometimes our parents even have that expectation on us without even telling us about it. There was an Easter Stills study on caregiving done that showed that 47% of sibling caregivers always expected to take on a caregiving role. So this is just something that a lot of us were born into, and we're either not given or we don't see any other option rather than being that caregiver and taking on that role eventually. Also from that Easter Stills studies, we learned about some of the negative impacts that come along with caregiving. We know that there's less time for self. You are responsible for another person. And most of the time we're responsible for more than just our siblings. We have spouses, we have aging parents, we have kids. It's not just this one relationship that we have to provide caregiving for. And that really eats into the time that we do have for self-care and for taking care of ourselves. We know that caregiving has increased anxiety and stress and can cause poor sleep, especially, if you have a sibling with really high needs, whether they're medical, behavioral, whatever it may be. It can really impact all of those things. And then there's also the financial impact that can come along with caregiving, both from a perspective that you may not be able to work, and so you are losing out on finances that way. I know that as of right now, I think only 9 states have any sort of paid family leave legislation, either active or pending. There is no federal mandate for paid family medical leave. And then there's also the impact of having to potentially pay for your siblings' care. If you may have to supplement what they can get through Medicaid or Medicare or insurance and pay for different things out out of pocket. And then that's certainly finances are always a big stressor in general. So that's another added layer here. And all of these things existed before 2020 happened to all of us, before we entered into a global health crisis, before our country and the world reached boiling points that brought centuries of race-based injustice and trauma to widespread attention, and people really started organizing and getting more involved in those movements. And just on that note, I would be remiss to not mention today, happy Juneteenth, happy Pride Month. Holidays are a great way of recognition, but I hope we also recognize that they are just scratching the surface of impacting and mitigating the, what injustice and institutional prejudice does in this country. So, but they are still something to be celebrated. So again, thank you for spending this time with me. So we know caregiving causes stress. What exactly are the parts of caregiving that cause that stress? There are the external things that are kind of happening around us. That time management, like I mentioned in the last slide, having less time for yourself when you're probably also juggling marriage and children and work and school and a million of other things on top of this responsibility of caregiving. It can be very hard to manage your time. Again, those financial worries, the financial impacts, relationship concerns, whether it's the relationship between you and the sibling you're caregiving for. Certainly there can be stresses there, and providing that sort of intimate care can cause a lot of tension between folks. I know when I'm caregiving for my brother, we often come to a head, and he doesn't like being told what to do, which is fair. He is an adult, and I don't like being told what to do as an adult either. So that can cause issues. But then there's also those relational concerns outside of the caregiving. With those other people in your life that you're responsible for. We know that sometimes caregiving has had negative impacts on marriages and partnerships, and just the time and attention that you're able to give to those other relationships in your life that are just as important. Future planning is a big source of stress. Thinking about, you may not be the primary caregiver now, but what about in the future when maybe your parents are gone? When you have a family to take care of as well, if you don't already. That future planning is something that's really hard for a lot of people to talk about, and it's kind of one of those elephant in the room kind of things that adds more stress. Again, sibling behaviors. I know that often I'm fairly grateful that my brother and I get along pretty well, except for those moments where we do butt heads, just like siblings always do. But I know that there are a lot of caregivers out there who have siblings that have high behavioral needs, and it can, they are dealing with, maybe abusive behaviors or violence or something like that from their sibling, not necessarily intentionally either, but it's just a part of how they communicate and experience life, and that adds a lot of stress as well. And medical needs. This is more what I can relate to as a sibling. As I mentioned before, my brother has had 2 kidney transplants and has some pretty complex medical needs and requires really daily hands-on medical care. And just trying to understand all of that, trying to prepare for all of that is a big source of stress for me personally. And then we have all the things that come from inside, those things that internally cause stress for us. Something I very much relate to, again, is the need to feel, the need for perfectionism, the need to feel like you need to be helping everybody and doing everything right all of the time. I think often as siblings of folks with disabilities, we do kind of feel that pressure. I know I felt that pressure to be the easy kid, right? To be the one who didn't cause any more stress than was already happening. And that is a lot of pressure to put on a child, on an adult, on anybody. Again, caregiving can bring along depression and anxiety if you aren't already experiencing that on your own. There's resentment, again, going back to those kind of relationship concerns and potential like behaviors with your sibling. There can be a lot of resentment that builds in feeling like I didn't ask for this job. But I have to do this. And that can, having those negative feelings, I think really it causes more stress. Just you feel the resentment, and then it leads to the guilt you feel for feeling resentment and feeling like you don't want to take this on, but you have to. Or maybe you feel guilt because you feel like you're not doing enough and you're not being perfect. And then also there's that isolation we can feel. I think as siblings of folks with disabilities, I know for a very long time, I was not connected with any other siblings. I was not connected with any other caregivers. And that isolation caused a lot of extra stress and worries for me, feeling like there wasn't anybody else going through what I was going through or who could understand what I was going through. So all these things that are causing stress, how do we recognize when it is reaching your breaking point, when we are reaching that point of burnout, where we are no longer going to be effective or compassionate or our full selves when coming to caregiving? And I'd really like to shout out here that a lot of my information and a lot of information these days around self-care comes from the social and activist organizing movements. A lot of information here came from a really great resource from Larissa Pham called Caring for Yourself to Care for Others, a Burnout and Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. And this was developed in June 2020 as a resource and direct response to the murder of George Floyd and the organizing around anti-Black racism and police brutality, and the need to self-care and build resiliency when being part of active political movements. But it is offered as a tool for anyone with who the message may resonate. And as a caregiver, the message that is shared in this toolkit certainly resonated with me. So recognizing burnout, what does it look like? Again, that loss of sleep, chronic fatigue, feeling tired all of the time. You may experience physical changes or illness. You may lose weight, you may gain weight, you may just not be feeling yourself, you may be low energy. You may start having, gastrointestinal issues. There are so many systemic issues tied to our nervous systems. And when we are stressed, our nervous systems are fried, and it just kind of could put our whole system off balance. Another way to recognize burnout is kind of realizing when you're reaching those points of resentment. You may be avoidant. I know when I'm getting very burnout with my family, I might ignore a little more phone calls than I do regularly, right? I'm a little more hesitant to respond to messages and calls from my family because I just feel like I can't deal with it. There's numbing. We may kind of just dissociate from what's going on altogether. We may just try to ignore the stress of what's happening and turn to whatever we do to kind of numb ourselves and take ourselves out of what our current situation is. There's, again, back to that depression, we may feel hopelessness. We may feel like, I'm stuck in this place. Things aren't going to get better. I can't do enough. I can't fix this. Kind of being stuck in those negative thought patterns is definitely our brains and our bodies telling us that we are rapidly approaching burnout. And again, that resentment, irritability, anger, our fuses become quite a bit shorter when we're getting burnout. Our patience is lessened, and we may just not have the access or ability to access the tools and the coping mechanisms that we do often use. We are completely shut off to those because we've reached a breaking point. What's the good news here? I know this all sounds very negative and stressful, but the good news is that we are in a time where the impact of burnout and the importance of self-care, I think, are understood and being discussed more than ever. And the resources, tools, and just kind of simple camaraderie that are available, they're in abundance now, and they're in abundance if we allow ourselves to seek them. I'd like to share a quote from somebody who has been really helpful in my self-care journey, author and Western Buddhist meditation teacher, Sharon Salzberg. She says in one of her books, when we cultivate tenderness and compassion for the whole of our experiences, the difficult and hurtful parts, in addition to the triumphs, we naturally behave more kindly and responsible to others. I think this is just a really beautifully put kind of way of restating that oxygen mask dilemma we talked about earlier, that in order to fully show up for others and respond kindly and with love and effectively, we have to cultivate tenderness and compassion for ourselves and for what we're going through and what we're experiencing. So how do we cope? We know all these stresses exist. We know how these stresses are impacting our bodies. Where do we go from there? First, we remember that we aren't alone and that our feelings are completely valid and completely normal. It's estimated that there's over 7 million Americans that have an intellectual and developmental disability. And I like to think that if we assume most people have at least one sibling, there's probably over 7 million siblings just like you out there. So that always helps me put into context that I'm certainly not alone in this situation. We need to make self-compassion and self-care priorities. That's why we're here. And I think this is a difficult part for all of us, and I think has been part of the larger conversation around self-care, is that self-care has often been seen as something that is selfish or something that is a luxury. And that certainly does come into different privileges that we all have or may not have, and our ability to self-care with those privileges or not. But I think we have to reframe our thinking, and we have to see self-care not as a luxury, not as something that's selfish, but as something that is entirely necessary. Just like an oxygen mask on the airplane, right? And finally, we need to cultivate a resilient spirit. We need to ask ourselves and figure out, how do I bounce back? How do I bounce back when I'm reaching burnout? How do I bounce back when something traumatic or I'm in a stressful situation as a caregiver and with my family? And something I've really appreciated kind of in the larger cultural conversation, again, that's been happening is that I don't know about you guys, but I've often been complimented on being a resilient person. And while I accepted the compliment, it always kind of came with this, well, I don't really have a choice, right? And so I think we are realizing more that resiliency is not necessarily an inherent gift. Certainly, I think some of us are maybe born more with the capacity to be resilient naturally than others, but resiliency is really a survival skill. It's something that's born from trauma. It's something that's born from adversity and necessity. And we just have to remember that resiliency is not an immunity to hardship, but a way that we can move through it. And so recognizing that resiliency is not something you're born with or not, it's something you build, and it's a skill and a tool that you give yourself to survive in the experience that you're living in. Whoops. So how else do we care for ourselves? We start with the body, right? We know that stress and trauma are something that are held in our bodies. They're held in our nervous systems. And while this can lead to plenty of problems, it's also a way that we can use it, and we can use our bodies to help work through and heal from that stress and from that trauma and burnout. This is a slide where in the past I would often start telling you, oh, get 8 hours of sleep, eat a balanced meal, drink plenty of water, and exercise regularly. But I'm betting that most of us already know this, are probably trying our best to do those things anyways. And I think the truth is that there's no one size fits all for how to care for our bodies either. And I want to recognize that. So I think caring for your body means to build a relationship with yourself, with your body and your nervous system that feels natural to you. Whatever feels good to you and helps you move through your burnout, to move through your grief and trauma, to move through these kind of negative emotions that can fester inside of us and lead to this stress and burnout. Figure out what helps you work through that. And that's finding those physical ways to channel your emotions, but both good and bad, because I think it's good to express our emotions, again, both good and bad physically. We can dance with joy and we can dance with sorrow. I know I've certainly done both of those things myself. So I just want to encourage you to do what works for you to come back to your body and to re-regulate our nervous system, because we know that learning how to regulate our nervous systems can literally rewire our brains and help build that resiliency to stress. It can look like, it can go for a walk, doing deep breathing, splashing cold water on your face, singing and dancing, or doing cardio. Not if you're me, but some of you, cardio may be the thing that helps you work through it, and that's great. Again, I just want to encourage you to do what feels good and right and natural for your body. And just as important as that physical care is the mental and spiritual self-care. Things that have been extremely helpful for me are meditation and mindfulness. They are just, I think, extremely powerful tools. And I think it's important to remember that just like physical care, they can come in many different forms. I know for myself, for a long time, I had this idea that meditation had to be sitting cross-legged, straight up in silence, totally focused. And I have learned that that's not it. You can meditate anywhere, anytime. I have meditated in the long grocery store line, especially during the last year when grocery shopping is a little more stressful than it's ever been. And the other thing that I always struggled with meditation was being like, well, I can't meditate because my brain never shuts up. I can't quiet my brain. That's just not, that doesn't happen for me. But I have learned that meditation is not about shutting your thoughts off. It's about recognizing them. It's about honoring them and letting them pass by and kind of returning to that breath, returning to your center, and letting those things move through you. I think you can begin again 1,000 times when it comes to meditation, and that's the beauty of it. You can begin again, and that's what makes you stronger, and that builds that muscle. Journaling, whether it's through actually writing in a journal, using an online diary like I do, whether it's through making art, visual art, music, poetry, whatever your soul calls for you to do. Even social media. I am unashamed that I certainly use social media as an outlet and a diary to share both my joys and my sorrows, and having a place to put that, I think, is extremely important. I think journaling also really helps us kind of learn. Here, what I say at the bottom of the slide is that we can use these to learn what triggers us and how we respond to that. And so I know being reflective, especially after times of stress, really helps me, because it helps me pinpoint what happened that made me stressed. How did I respond to that stress? And then I can start to plan ahead and be more prepared for when those things are going to happen in the future, and have a stronger ability to recognize when those feelings of stress and burnout are coming along. Co-regulation is super great, and that's just processing your feelings with another person, talking it out with somebody else, with a friend that understands, with a partner, with another sibling that you might be connected with here today. Just talking through those feelings and getting them out of our heads and into the air, I think, is extremely important and really helpful in helping us, again, kind of move through them. And my favorite, therapy. I don't think there's a single person in this world that would not benefit from therapy in some form or another. All of us can use more tools and skills and self-reflection in order to be our best selves. And I think it's, again, important to remember, just like how we are reframing our thinking around self-care, we need to reframe our thinking around therapy. And remember that asking for help is truly a sign of strength. And there are lots of resources out there, psychologytoday.com, apa.org that can help you find a provider that is suited to your specific needs, your insurance, your other preferences. I was able to use Psychology Today to find the therapist I see now, who specifically had some history with working with families experiencing disability. And that's having somebody who can kind of understand that experience, or at least has a knowledge of it, has been extremely helpful for me. So I'm going to show a video here, and actually I may need to reshare to make sure I have the sound checked. Just talking about mindfulness and what a powerful tool it can be. So, all right, I think we're good on the audio. All right. I can't.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribes for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
So I just love that, seeing mindfulness as a superpower, because it's been especially helpful for me. When I used to feel stress and negative emotions, and even now I'm not immune to it, certainly. I would become that. I would become what I was feeling and think that there was no way I could feel anything else. I would kind of, again, have that initial kind of knee-jerk reaction to those emotions, and I would let them take me away from my center. And by using mindfulness, using meditation, using therapy, I have been able to kind of add a buffer in my brain, where now when those negative emotions come on, I don't immediately react. I'm able to kind of pause and think about them, decide whether they're right for me to feel and how the best way for me to feel them is. And that's been incredibly healing and helpful for me in my journey through self-care and being a sibling caregiver.
Hey, Kaley?
Yeah.
Sorry, just breaking in to let you know we've got about 5 minutes left in the session.
Okay, guys, I talked too much. I'm gonna cruise through the rest of this, and I apologize that I'm going to have to cruise through the rest of it. But taking us to our next section, I'd like to share another quote from Prentice Hemphill, who's an author, therapist, and political organizer, who said, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." And that's because I think setting and using boundaries as caregivers is extremely important in our journey towards self-care. Setting boundaries looks like knowing your limits and communicating them. It's deciding what are you comfortable with providing as a caregiver. Maybe it's about protecting what's important to you, whether that be certain time that is dedicated to your family or your partner or your kids. That is a no, I'm not going to be available during this time. Maybe it's different tasks like that personal care. If that's something that causes a strain between you and your sibling, providing that hands-on care, maybe that's a hard limit for you, and you need to be very clear and specific about what those limits are and communicate how and when you are willing to help. I think it's important to learn to let go of what we should be doing as caregivers and just focus on what we can be doing. We need to learn to say no without guilt. And if saying no feels too harsh, offer an alternative. Say, no, I can't do this, but I will do this instead. I love doing that, especially when it comes to delegating and using our resources. When my parents will reach out for something and I can say, no, I can't do that, but let me help you find the person who can do that. I like to tell people to be the person who finds the person, and find those ways where you can lift that weight and those responsibilities off of yourself. And again, letting go of what we should be doing. I think we need to remember that the word should reflects internalized expectations and values coming from ourselves, coming from our parents, and we just need to learn to let those go and be honest with ourselves about what we can do in any given situation and how we can do it as our best selves. And finally, we have community care, and that's, again, being the person who finds the person, educating ourselves and our families on the resources that are available out there so that we can relieve some of that burden from ourselves as caregivers. The network, the ARC network, the Sibling Leadership Network, there are so many great organizations out there that can help you and your family find those resources that are available in your state and your community. You want to utilize respite and future planning. For respite, it can be in and out of the home. It can be from a few hours to a few days. And it's as important for your sibling as it is for you. Because I know my brother gets tired of me taking care of him when I am doing that. So he deserves the break as well. And I think we need to remember or plan to use it at regular intervals, as well as planning ahead for emergencies that may come up, and having kind of that tool in our back pocket when we need it. Again, that future planning, talking about what's going to happen when our parents are gone, when things have changed. And I think having that laid out is a big relief in the back of our minds, and something that we can know, okay, there's a plan in place. I can set this down and leave it there until we get to that point. And also finding support from those who get it. Again, as someone who didn't connect with other siblings until I was in my early 20s, that first time where I went and had a beer with a couple other siblings and I just heard their stories of, oh my gosh, my brother did this today. And I was like, oh my gosh, my brother does that too. I can't tell you what a relief it was, and this sort of glow I just felt afterwards of finding that community and finding those people who understood intimately the very unique experiences that I was having as a sibling. And the fact that you're here, the fact that you're connected with the SLN and you've shown up today is obviously a great start. And I'm proud of all of us for being here.
Awesome. Kaley, thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to cut you off.
Yeah, I apologize that I talked too much and didn't get through it, but thank you. I will leave up, let me go back. I'll leave up kind of the last few slides here just for people to look at.
We did have a couple questions about the burnout resources that you had mentioned. If you have links to share about for those, can you throw those in the chat box for everyone? If not, you can email me them later and I'll put them up for everybody.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly, I will send those by email so that those can be shared with you guys later. I do see also an ask for that Easter Seals caregiving study. And unfortunately, when I went back to the Easter Seals website, in preparation for this. The study was no longer available for download, but Easter Seals is a great resource as well for that caregiving and respite information. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to access that report again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll have the resources for you in the folder with the link that I provided as soon as I can. If you're sticking around for the mindfulness techniques, it's going to be in the same room, so you don't have to go anywhere. Yeah, Kaley, thank you so much for everything, and thank you for everybody who joined.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. Thank you. Take care.